everyone? Welcome to the Political Insider. I'm Brett Smith, your humble host. Joining me today is a good friend. He's a former U.S. House of Representatives member from Michigan, a recovering politician, also a contributor to American Greatness and Human Events. Thaddeus McCotter, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brett.
Absolutely. Well, we're witnessing history over the last 24 hours. We have no House Speaker. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to get you, to talk about this because you were in the House from 2003 to 2012. How was it different back then from what we're seeing today?
Well, in many ways, it's not. It's quite the same. You still have all these people who are elected as essentially free agents. They join the caucuses and they want to do their thing. It's hard to corral the cats and to get things done. And we're seeing that with the speaker's race right now. The big difference, I would say, Brett, is that you had the Republican Study Committee when I was there, which was the conservative force within the caucus. You also had the Main Street Partnership. The Main Street Partnership has generally dwindled away to a large extent. Those were the moderates. And now you also have the Freedom Caucus, which is even more conservative than the RSC. So I think that was the big structural change within the House Republican caucus that has occurred since my departure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different place. You think about like the Tea Party and sort of what's taken place since you've been there. I guess that probably started when you were there. Was that like 2008 or something?
Oh, the Tea Party. This Tea Party started when I was there. I remember it distinctly, and I remember taking to the floor because you could see what was going to happen. And I said that the Republican Party has to change, and I said that the Tea Party has to grow up. And I spelled out that what's going to happen is you're going to wind up getting co-opted or discarded. And if you don't start to become more politically sensible and mature. And what happened was they didn't. And by 2008, I believe, you had McCain was our nominee. And then by 2012, you had Mitt Romney as our nominee. And what happened to the Tea Party? I remember sitting there while a lot of the Tea Party, quote unquote, electeds were coming in the door. And their first concerns were not about how to reduce government power and control over our lives, but instead what offices they have and what committees they'd be on. They were co-opted from the beginning when they came in the door. And I think that some of that is still sticking to Kevin McCarthy right now because the Young Guns and their program with him, Ryan and Eric Cantor and Paul Ryan, a large part of their job was to co-opt a lot of the members as they came in the door to make them much more amenable to dealing with people like Speaker Boehner and others, which I'm not saying is a good or a bad thing, because I can understand the necessity of making sure that the caucus functions. But if you were worried about the Tea Party and you were worried about that they were not going to deliver, you could see already that they were being co-opted by the establishment as they walked in the door. Mm-hmm. And Kevin's the last of them that's still there. And so I think that some of that animus, especially members who have been there for quite some time and remember this, is helping to drive some of what we're seeing today.
Well, we obviously need new leadership in the GOP. Even when they win, they either fail or just refuse to deliver what they promised. So, who should be in leadership, and how do we get our representatives to actually do what they say they do?
Well, you have to understand that these are people who get elected by their districts. They get to win a primary to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party. They then win a general election, some in safe seats, some in swing seats. And when they get there, they want to do the best that they can to get reelected and to serve their constituents, hopefully in reverse order.
Right.
But in the final analysis, when you're looking at a caucus leadership, what has to happen is it's not something that happens immediately. It happens over time. If you go back to even Gerald Ford, when he led an insurgency to become House Minority Leader back in the day, or especially in our time, our generation's Newt Gingrich. Mm-hmm. What Gingrich did was not only a policy mindset to be more conservative, but Newt Gingrich and his allies put in the time and spade work. And it's a long process to build towards Speaker Gingrich. Remember, he was a whip for a while, and he was laying the groundwork. He was taking on Democrats, but it was a long, slow build to 1994. And so when you look at the Republicans now, what they're trying to do, and a lot of them have not put in the work within the caucus or within the electorate or to help other members get elected, to help lead and build towards the new insurgency to get the new leadership that the House Republicans need. On the contrary, what happens is Kevin McCarthy has still continued to help candidates across the board raise money, get elected, even people, some whom I believe are opposing him now, he helped to get because he knew the need for a majority. So what happens then is Kevin has done the work with the caucus, built chits, built alliances, built friends within the caucus, and the people that we're seeing opposing him have not done similar things, have instead gone on Fox News or others or wherever and grandstanded. And so they not only do not have the capacity and the chits that Kevin McCarthy has, more importantly, they don't have it with the other members. Mm-hmm. And so they don't have the credibility. And one of the things that I find that is very disturbing at this point is it's becoming counterproductive. Because they're not just challenging Kevin McCarthy, they're challenging all the ones that support him and want this over with so they can go back and serve their constituents and get reelected. They want calm, they want peace. So they're alienating them. And somebody like Jim Jordan, who is an incredible member of Congress, who was the leader of the Freedom Caucus, he's now being emasculated by his own members because he could not deliver them to Kevin McCarthy. They wouldn't even listen to Jim. So then the other members of the caucus are like, well, Jim, what good are you? Because you can't even get these people to vote for Kevin. What can you get them to vote on? So it's become very counterproductive because people like Jim Jordan are the very types of people that you would want to see elevated in House leadership and run for other offices. And this is hurting their ability to do so. So in fact, again, much of what we're seeing, while it may be emotionally satisfying to some people, it is very problematical and counterproductive because, as you know better than anybody, look, I come from Michigan. Michigan may not be Texas. Michigan may not be Tennessee, two states which I truly love, or Florida. So when you look at Michigan, you're like, our independents and our swing voters are critical to getting Republicans elected. And the biggest problem that they've had with Republicans is they viewed us as intemperate and chaotic and incapable of governing. And so, and right now, I live in a state that everything is now run by Democrats over the last 6 years. Everything is now run by Democrats. The legislature, the governor, the secretary of state, state Supreme Court, the attorney general, everything. And that happened over 6 years. They want to see a Republican Party capable of governing, and they're not seeing it out of Washington right now. And unfortunately, that's the only place where they can see Republicans capable of governing, because in Michigan, again, we don't have a governing majority in any chamber or anywhere. So it's counterproductive, it's unfortunate, and while it may be emotionally satisfying, it's politically counterproductive. And I think it's, in terms of policies, it's going to be very hard for them to attract people to their policies when people write them off the bat immediately as being incapable of governing. So what's the point?
You know, when picking a new speaker, what's it like behind closed doors when the horse trading is taking place? Matt Gaetz said yesterday that McCarthy threatened to remove certain Republicans from committees if they didn't vote for him. I would imagine he can also offer committee seats to those who don't have one in exchange for votes, like George Santos. Does this kind of stuff really happen behind the scenes, you know, like we hear about, or is it worse? What's that pressure like?
Well, the irony is just amusing. It's, if Kevin McCarthy was such a fearful individual, he'd already have the votes for speaker.
That's a great point.
You know what I mean? This isn't Sam Rayburn, for God's sake. You know, or Joe Cannon. So what we're looking at is, like, the House is structured vastly differently. First, to Gates's point, look, don't complain about the consequences if you're trying to look courageous. Right. Oh my God, he's going to come after me. It's like, well, didn't you know that going in? But it's really an empty threat because we have the steering committee. Mm-hmm. Each state selects people to serve on the steering committee, while some of the leadership have more votes. I mean, it's a collective effort. And so what is really going to stop Gaetz or others from becoming get the seats that they want is the members of the steering committee that are angry about having to sit here and keep voting on a speaker's race with no better alternative in front of them. So they're going to hold their grudge, and McCarthy's not going to have to do anything because his supporters are largely probably going to wind up. Because remember, Kevin is supported by over 200 members of the caucus.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So those people are looking at these other 19 going, why are you doing this to me? Not Kevin. Why are you doing this to me? And making it harder for me to get reelected and making me look bad. And they're going to carry the grudge into the steering committee when those people get elected to that. So Kevin doesn't have the ability to punish people the way that people would think that they used to in the past. Plus, because of the nature of that majority, people like Boebert and others who are in swing seats are going to have to get Kevin's support to get reelected, because otherwise he'll never be Speaker McCarthy again. or anybody who's speaker is going to have to support them because they're the swing seats we need to keep a majority. So they're kind of like playing with house money and taking on Kevin, knowing that the nature of their seat is vital to keeping the majority in the first place. So a lot of this is the Sturm and Drang and drama that you expect, but it's not really how this situation works. And again, I go back to the fact that if you're really looking at trying to change the leadership in the House Republican caucus or even in the Senate, you have to do the spade work to build up the chits with your fellow members and to get that. In Michigan, we had a tremendous example of this. John Engler, when he first got elected to the House, came out of college. And people thought if you looked at the House when John Engler first started serving in the Michigan House, they'd have said everybody here could be governor except that guy. Except John Engler understood how Michigan legislature worked. He understood the rules of the chamber. He wound up getting elected, winning a primary against a Republican senator. Okay, he beat a Republican senator to get to the state Senate. And when he got to the state Senate, he wound up dealing with moderates and militant types, liberal Republicans, and he said, I want to change this place. Eventually, over time, John Engler not only brought in new conservatives by winning elections, he also led caucus insurrections with them, and he took power as the Senate Majority Leader. Eventually, he upset an incumbent governor who would have been vice president under Bill Clinton if he hadn't lost to John Engler by 1,000-some votes. So when then we watched John Engler transform the state. My point is that you can have constructive change. It takes a long, hard slog to do it. It takes people willing to do it, people willing to join the Republican Party and change that so that you can change the outcome of elections and support candidates that you believe in. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And unfortunately, when we act like the left, thinking we need a headshot and everything else will take care of itself, or some grandstanding gesture, it's not going to work. It becomes counterproductive. And it not only, the worst part of it is it leads people who want to join the Republican Party and try to change it, the people that want to run for Congress and try to change it, members of the House that may be willing to look at other leadership down the road. They're being turned off by this. And it's becoming, and that is the great danger. When you convince people that their efforts do not matter, that why should we even bother, that's when change never happens.
It seems like these people don't understand the process, because I don't see an off-ramp here.
If you don't understand the process and you don't understand what it takes for other people to get there, and if you're largely comprised of people who come from safe seats where you only have to win a plurality of your own party to win it largely, you don't understand the nature of America, the nature of other seats. You lack the political empathy necessary to understand, I know we need you to get back. How do we help you get back so that we can move the ball forward? It's in some ways, I think the best way it was explained to me is at the time was some people want to throw a touchdown on every play. And that leads to interceptions, that leads to problems, that leads to losing games. If you just get a first down, keep getting first downs, keep grinding it out, and eventually you'll win. Now, that is usually the case. It should have happened with Michigan over TCU. It didn't. I admit it. It should have, but they got out of it. They got out of their game and they started trying to hit home runs on every play, threw a couple pick sixes, and you see the problem. I remember back when I was there, and this should be a good guide, do you remember when Roy Blunt and John Boehner went at it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And when John won by I think a vote, we never announced the results, but it was really close on that second ballot. What happened was Roy Blunt looked at John Boehner and said, okay, it's over. We need to get together and we need to go forward. And John became the leader. Roy stayed the whip, and we did. And when we moved forward, Roy eventually went to the Senate, which probably means that he actually won in the end. And John got to stay, became speaker. But when you look at how adult that behavior was, to put the interests of America and the caucus and moving the ball forward first. Now, you may not like how Boehner wound up, but you did not see a dissolution of the caucus. We were able to take the majority back eventually. That was necessary. We're not seeing that here. We're not seeing any indication of that. And Americans this is not just a democracy. This is a delegation of your sovereign power through an election to these people, and you expect them to behave better than we see in elections. because these are the people who won, and they're supposed to go in and be able to govern. And they're not. You can't if you can't even choose a leader from your own party. That's a problem. The other part of it, Brett, as you well know, is that the speaker is the speaker of the entire House. People forget that. That is why you have a speaker and a majority leader position. The majority leader is the leader of the party. The speaker is there to look after the interests and the prerogatives and the power of the House as a whole, as a separate chamber, as a separate equal branch of government, as the legislature. Pelosi, in many ways, Speaker Pelosi totally abrogated that. And she became the leader of a party rather than the leader of the chamber. And she did that when she refused to let Kevin name people to the January 6th committee. Right there, you knew that was a huge problem.
Right.
Fortunately, our people who are protesting this are agreeing with the role that Pelosi carved out for the speaker as the leader of a party and ratifying it and reaffirming it, where instead they should be saying, well, what's really important for us as conservatives is the majority leader who brings forward the legislation, works for us for partisan ends. And good, put Kevin there as a ceremonial speaker and let him do whatever to represent the interests of the chamber. Again, it's counterproductive, but it's emotionally satisfying to some people.
If Kevin gets it, he's going to spend the next year and a half living out of hotel rooms and raising money.
Yep.
And I just think to myself, who wants to do that? What do you think of the Republicans attempting to abandon the Pelosi role in favor of one where you don't have to be in House leadership to call for a new speaker? Simply 5 House Republicans can call for new leadership. I'm hearing that they're even asking for one member of the House who doesn't happen to be in leadership to call for new leadership or for the seat to be vacated, I think as they call it.
It goes back to first, I don't have a problem with whatever rules they decide are going to govern them for the next 2 years. That's
right.
Fine. House rules are always malleable. They're different than the Senate by far. The will of the majority is supposed to prevail. So what's going to happen, though, is if you look at this realistically, okay, let's say we go to 1. All right, so on any given day, 1 clown can stand up and demand a leadership vote. Okay, so then the entire Congress, the entire House shuts down. They'll lose. And then what happens? You look like idiots.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would think that you would need I would think at least a threshold of 25% of the caucus to do it, to bring them to a ground. Because again, we're not a parliament. Kevin's there for 2 years, if he gets it. Right. Or whoever gets it is there for 2 years, and then you come back and the next Congress decides who they want. Only under exceptional circumstances should you remove them after you make that. I mean, look, if you can't decide a leader for 2 years, what good are you? Then why should I trust your judgment on legislation which doesn't expire in 2 years? You going to change your mind about that, or will there be unforeseen consequences? Because that's going to happen to me, Mr. Voter. Okay, Ms. Voter, not going to happen to you. Right. So it becomes, it's like, this is basically, how easy is it for me to get on Fox News and bitch? Or on Newsmax or OAN or wherever. How easy is it for me to be counterproductive?
Yeah,
and I say that as someone who I was in leadership, and I also opposed leadership. I fought leadership, as you know, on tons of issues, such as the Wall Street bailout and others. I was the turd in the punch bowl, man. Okay.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So eventually they scooped me out. But eventually, what happens is you have to be able to govern. Okay. And so when what's done is done, and then we move forward, and you have to do the hard work to change the caucus, to change the outcomes of elections, and to change how the Republican Party operates.
Yeah.
So it's a comprehensive move, and it's not just these guys in Congress. I mean, I would argue that in many ways the RNC vote for chair is far more important than what they're doing now with Kevin. I would argue that state party races are far more important, because it is from these places that you will find your next candidates, and they will have to support the next candidates. They will have to build the next majority there. And this is where we are losing.
Yeah. Speaking of Ronna, do you think she deserves the seat at the RNC chair again?
No. And I say that as someone from Michigan, because she's from Michigan. But these are 3 election cycles. And after, again, in 6 years, I've watched everything in Michigan is gone.
Right.
Gone. And if you can't win swing states, and it's not just ballot harvesting. I mean, there's a lot of demographic changes. Michigan's the fourth highest state for people leaving. And they're they're generally over 45, which is, you tend to be more conservative as you age. Yeah. So we need to look at
those are also
not only just individuals.
Yeah.
We need an honest and fearless introspection of what does the electorate look like? And why are we resonating in certain areas and why are we resonating in others? We need to audit every single consultant ever hired by the RNC or state parties or candidates or otherwise. Look, why do they get a pass when they lose? If you reward failure, you're just going to get more failure. Now, they may know how to talk to the candidates and they may know how to talk to the Republican consultant class but they don't know how to talk to independents. They don't know how to talk to enough Americans to get us a majority in the Senate or get us a bigger majority in the House, let alone elect a president. These are things that have to happen. And again, I think a large part of it is if we look at what happens today and people don't like how this ends up in Washington with the speaker vote, they're just going to tune out and say, what does it matter?
Right.
Why should I try to be a Republican precinct delegate and try to change things there? It doesn't matter.
Who do you like for RNC chair? I know Harmy Dillon. There's a couple other people that have been mentioned, but anybody strikes your fancy?
Dillon is very impressive. There's a lot of good candidates, but again, I have no animus towards Ron. I mean, it was a very hard job, and it was 3 cycles, but now it's time. It's time. It just didn't work out the way we'd like, which is fine.
Yeah.
I would think that what you need is someone. I think so. Basically, and I got my next Human Events article will be about this coming on Monday.
Sounds good.
Is you can't view it through the prism of establishment versus the grassroots. You just have to view it as how do we get people elected? Mm-hmm. Is the next chair is this going to be their own stepping stone to power, or do they view the party as an entity unto itself? And do they understand that we should stay out of primaries and focus on winning general elections? Because that's what matters. And are they going to view this as an inquisition or as a political operation? Are you going to prune the tree or are you going to get Republicans elected? Are you a ministerial organization or are you a discretionary organization? Because I would argue the discretionary organization are the people you send and get elected. Mm-hmm. And so do they understand all this? Can they message? Because in many ways, in a lot of states, especially as you look at the local state party chairs, in Michigan, the state party chair is going to be critical because who else speaks to the Republican Party? We don't have a governor. We don't have an AG. We don't have a statewide elected official. We don't have a speaker. We don't have a majority leader. So who's going to do it? So if you elect someone in Michigan who is a disaster, it's going to have ramifications for every election, including the presidential in 2024. The same thing with the RNC. So I want someone there who believes that the RNC is an end unto itself. Its fundamental purpose is to elect Republicans in general elections and doesn't care about doing the work because they don't have an ulterior agenda to get themselves elected or to promote power for themselves anywhere else. These are types of things that have to happen. These are the very hard decisions that have to happen. And if we elect the wrong people, you're just going to get more failure. If you reward failure, you get more failure. The hard part now is you have to have an honest assessment. In Michigan, do we still have enough Republican voters?
That's a great question,
and
considering the exodus of
what
people.
What can we do to build a coalition to acquire more Republican voters?
Well, isn't that kind of what they're saying about New York? The reason why Zeldin didn't win is because there's too many New Yorkers, conservatives, Republicans, or maybe just right of center folks that are just bailing out of New York. And there's none left. And I know that the argument on the other side is, well, that means it will have building a majority in future Congresses. But that's in the House. Right.
The Senate is still 2 per state. Mm-hmm. So if you start defaulting in a lot of these states, you may get a huge buildup in Congress, in the House, but you're going to lose the Senate.
Right.
And then you still have the Electoral College issue. Mm-hmm. So the part that I find fascinating in what the Great Resort, I think it's being called by some people, is it's going to have ramifications that aren't necessarily good for conservatives or Republicans. But I think a lot of that can change. A large part of what we're seeing now and even with what we're seeing, to bring us back to the original point, seeing on the floor of the House, is you're starting to see the Republican Party is sorting out in its own mind what needs to happen. And I think that that's a positive thing, as long as it doesn't lead us to believe that nothing we do matters.
Right. No, I'm all for creative chaos, but there's got to be an off ramp here where we come together and coalesce with all of this infighting, from the Freedom Caucus to the rhinos and everything in between. Is there any way Republicans can kiss and make up, given what's going on the floor right now, so we can focus on 24? Or are we too much of a torn and frayed party at this point?
Well, you have to remember that McCarthy's getting over 200 votes. Okay, so you're looking at a handful of individuals with about 10% roughly. And those are the ones who are going to decide whether it's going to be able to pass anything at all. Okay. Now, I would think that, having served in Congress and having been in my share of political spats with people, that you can always put the interest of the country and your district first, and work with anybody if you believe in your conscience that that is the way to go, that there is something between the two of you that can actually be beneficial to everybody. You should be able to set aside your personal differences to do your job. And if you can't, then you got to go. So, yeah. And then that will be up to their constituents to determine whether or not these individuals need to go, or whether they've been able to set aside their differences and work with the other 200 to get things done.
Do you think it's a good idea for this new Republican House to mount a bunch of investigations into Hunter and Joe Biden, or push forward with the new battle for the hearts and minds of voters with a clear plan and message to win back the White House in 2024?
I think it's important for them to, especially because given the fact that basically we have the corporate media is acting like a state-run media these days.
Right.
So they need to investigate certain things. First, they need to put forward legislation that actually makes people's lives better, because that's really what they get elected for. And especially in the minds of independents, they didn't just send them there to go fight with Democrats. They sent them there to actually try to solve problems. And then let Schumer and the Democratic majority shoot down good ideas, because that's what they did. They're Democrats.
Yeah.
But secondarily, yes, the investigations matter. But I think that if you put these, there's two other things. One, you can still deal with legislation and bring issues to the fore, like antitrust legislation, to show how big tech is censoring Americans and infringing upon free speech, including with Democrats in this administration. That is in promotion of passing legislation maybe to help curb and break up big tech. So that's an investigation with an endpoint that is actually in the best interest of the American people, that is actually a concrete policy solution. The investigation of things, too, does not necessarily have to be partisan. You can look at foreign influence in American elections, and Hunter Biden is just a part of that. And that the laptop issue is just a part of that, which should then be incorporated in legislation to break up big tech. So these are the types of things that can and should happen, but they don't necessarily have to be, we're doing this to embarrass the president or to get Hunter Biden an indictment out of DOJ, which is not going to happen because of an investigation by the House Republicans. But these are things that can be brought to the surface, but they have to be in the service of a greater piece of legislation that actually improves the lives of Americans. I think that actually helps. Now, I think investigating the Department, the FBI and others, these are things that are necessary to make sure that they're not political, because nobody wants to see a partisan Department of Justice. Nobody wants to see a partisan Department of Homeland Security. Nobody wants to see a partisan FBI. And we've seen historically where FBI abuses have been egregious over the civil rights of Americans. You can ask Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about that. So when the time comes, these things make sense. But again, there's a greater goal than just partisan advantage to holding the investigations. That has to always be the focus of the Republicans when they do these things, which I shouldn't think is very hard, because most people do not want their civil rights infringed. And they don't want big tech to tell them what to do or governing their lives. Most people do not like big things impeding their pursuit of happiness and their own ability to self-govern. If you think about it, Brett, that's really kind of the epitaph for what we're seeing in Washington, isn't it? We are a nation that is a free republic, is a revolutionary experiment in self-government. And we're witnessing people we send to Washington incapable of self-government.
What about moves to impeach Joe Biden.
It's too partisan. We know it's not going to happen.
Right.
Right. But you can attack his administration for their failures to enforce federal law and others, and put forward legislation to show why the border must be secure.
I like going after Mayorkas. I think that's a great idea. And again, it's like you said, it's in service of securing the border,
Yep.
and fixing the absolute mayhem
Right.
that's going on down there right now.
We know there's misfeasance. Is it malfeasance? And how do we stop your malfeasance from continuing to impact the lives of Americans, especially Hispanic Americans who live along the border?
Yeah.
And they've been very vocal about this. The disproportionate population down there is Hispanic, and they're like, "Look, this is crazy. Why aren't you why aren't you enforcing federal law?" You could even argue that what they're doing is basically systemic racism, because they're just adding to the misery and the problems that you're seeing in a lot of these towns, which are heavily Hispanic.
Well, and they're tiny. A lot of them are unincorporated. A lot of these rural border towns, and they're just outmanned and outgunned. They have no resources, so it's they're punishing a lot of these border towns in a lot of ways, and it's just bizarre. And places like Del Rio. I mean, these are heavily Democratic places, and they're calling out for help.
Henry Cisneros and Democrats talking about that this cannot continue. This is it's hurting my constituents. And if you care about the migrants, you cannot support this. You cannot support Maduro and a lot of these Latin American wannabe dictators, like over in Cuba and down in Nicaragua and others, weaponizing immigration and using these people as a means to attack the United States, which is exactly what they're doing. These are human beings, and they're being weaponized by these hideous regimes. And then the Biden administration is playing along and abetting it.
Absolutely. They're enabling it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is insane. If you care about these people, stop this. I will say, though, I think that we're also not just seeing the best and brightest who want to come to America for a better life. We are seeing elements coming into the country that are not even, that should not be coming into the country.
Absolutely.
That are being housed in these caravans. And again, using real migrants as shields,
right,
to enter the country. So, but in the long run, if you think about it, the people who come here are escaping socialism. They're escaping places like Venezuela and others. And I don't think that over time, I think these are people going to be very conservative.
I hope so, man. I really do. I know that's
not in the short run. Maybe not in the short run.
But their kids, their grandkids.
They are certainly not going to want to see America turn into the very places that they helped to escape.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So last question, any 2023 predictions?
We will have a speaker. That's my prediction.
Hopefully within the next 24 hours.
Well, I'm not going that far.
No? How long do you think this thing will go on for? I mean, how long can it go on for?
Butch and Sundance went out rather quickly. What's the off-ramp, man?
That's what I keep asking myself. I mean,
all right, so here's McCarthy's kind of like, well, this is everything. I waited even after Ryan. I put Ryan there so I could try to get to some other time. I've done everything I possibly could do. If I don't get it now, what's my point of even staying in Congress, right? So Kevin's got no off-ramp.
Yeah.
And then, so what's the off-ramp for the 19 or so that oppose him? And what can Kevin deliver? Because a lot of what they may want has to go through the steering committee, and his people are going to be grinding their teeth to give these people anything.
Well, that was the other question. Is Kevin even capable of giving Lauren Boebert and others, Andy Biggs? Can he even give them what they want, or does that come from other bodies of Congress?
Generally, if the committee assignments come through the steering committee, and again, he may be able to reward them. But I'm telling you, as somebody and John Boehner, God love him, John always rewarded bad behavior. Because he was always, and we were always supposed to understand. Well, I had to give so-and-so this, so we could get, it's like, and we would just grind our teeth. And so it is theoretically possible. Mm-hmm. But eventually you reach a point where you're like, John, I ain't doing it. because
Right.
we're just going to get more of this, and they're just going to do it on everything. And that's
Can't
the
trust
biggest
them.
problem that Kevin has, is that everybody, well, if I put him on this committee, he's just going to do this again on a bill, or he's just going to make my life miserable. And so he's going to have trouble convincing his close associates to put these people on the committees that they want to do anything. That's even assuming that's what they want.
Right.
So
Right.
so what do they want? Do they have a name? I mean,
What-
Jim Jordan, like we talked about it, Jim's like, vote for Kevin, come on. And he's like, no, we're
Yeah,
going to vote for you. It's like, this is insane.
I'd settle for a list of demands at this point, so at least I knew what they were, what they wanted. That's that. You know what I mean? That's the only thing that we're kind of missing.
I need proof of life.
Right. But I mean, seriously, it's like a hostage situation. What is your list of demands? You know? So, I mean, this is like Die Hard. You know, do we need to bring in the FBI, you know, to figure this out? I can't, you know.
Don't talk to the Capitol Police.
Right. Well, anyway, well, sadly, we're out of time. Thanks so much. Why don't you give everyone your social media coordinates and also let them know where they can find your work?
I'm on Twitter, Truth Social, at Thad McCotter. American Events, American Greatness, Human Events.
Right.
The Bachelor Show, I do a podcast with them every weekend, and then on Monday we discuss the Middle East with Malcolm Homeland. I'm generally, the one good thing that comes out of this from my personal perspective is watching the clown show in Washington right now. I have no intention of relapsing into political mode.
No appetite to go back, huh?
I'm still a recovering politician, and this is doing everything it can to keep me on the straight and narrow.
Well, I don't know. I miss you. I miss you being up there, but I can totally, I get it, man. I mean, at some point in time, you know, it's just sort of like other things become more important.
Well, they always have been. That's why I'm a Republican.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks so much. We'll have you back. Appreciate it.